Yes. The King in Yellow is a 1895 book of short stories by Robert Chambers. And by the way, if it looks like kind of I have weird posture, apologies for that. I do have. I think I didn't pull something, but I did kind of exert myself in a weird direction at work, so I kind of have this weird torque, I guess, or lack of torque. So I kind of probably should stretch that out. I'm a terrible stretcher. But anyway, that out of the way. The King in Yellow. Yes, it's a very strange book. I've heard, and it was on my up there, occupying on my bookshelf for years, literally, because I heard first. Time I heard of it, probably this is a common kind of discovery for a lot of people that the people share is that it was on True Detective. The characters, and there's a lot of allusions to that. There's a kind of a fabric that Nick Piccoletto, I don't know if that's his name quite. It's Nick Piccoletto. Yeah, it's lots of references that are obscure, and The King in Yellow is one of them. I don't think they ever say the king. They say a lot of things like take off your mask or Carcosa. Like they'll say like in the land of Carcosa or stuff like that. Where yeah, but a lot of that stuff is actually not only from The King in Yellow, but there's an interesting kind of dynamic or rather culture of like sampling other people. This is almost like the Beastie Boys kind of sampling. Chambers actually, this is weird fiction. Weird fiction, who none other than H.P. Lovecraft was another big weird fiction guy that a lot of people talk about, whether it's Thomas Ligotti, who I've only read one book by. Oddly enough, that was a while ago, man. I think it was like also True Detective, kind of inspired Thomas Ligotti. It was A Conspiracy Against the Human Race, and yeah, that was kind of talking about. It's been so long. I say that's almost like 9 years ago. Jeez. But yeah, so. And back then, I didn't really read a lot. I think I said this. I didn't really get to a breaking point where I started kind of like accumulating and reading a lot more than I, at least to the frantic degree that I am now. But yeah, so yeah, he mentions Ambrose Bierce, and Ambrose Bierce was a weird fiction aficionado as well, and he was kind of the first kind of guy to kind of write this kind of grisly. But also in a sense, in a very plain spoken way. So he wrote this short story. It's a very short story, actually, almost flash fiction in a sense, because it's like, I want to say it's like 10 minutes long. You can find it on YouTube for free, or you could just listen to it on Audible. Yeah, but yeah, so I think it was published in 1886, and so yeah, Ambrose Bierce was talking about the kind of this ancient land where he's stumbling upon this the narrator, stumbling upon this ancient burial ground, and this that there's like it's called Carcosa, and there's like these other people that he's not alone, where it's like these spirits are looming around him. I think that's kind of how it went. I'm gonna have to listen to that again, but it was very enticing. And a lot of these things I am getting kind of in the spirit of Halloween. Some of this is actually pretty unconscious. Like I'm not like I think I said this last year when I started reading some of the stuff by Mark. Or no, not Mark Fisher. Yeah, Mark Fisher. Yeah, he was talking about kind of the horror kind of anthologies and stuff of Lovecraft too. References to texts that don't exist, which happens in this aligns definitely with this. Like The King in Yellow referencing to a play I'm sorry, not a play. Or in the same sense that Lovecraft had Necronomicon, that is like is alluded to, obliquely, but never actually shown or in any it's quoted but yeah, so that's kind of but yeah, Ambrose Bierce was this very intense guy, and he has his own kind of interesting mystery to the way his life he actually disappeared in his 70s. I think he was I think this was 1914 or 15, 20 years after this was out. So it's interesting. I wonder what Chambers thought of that, but I think the story is that Bierce went down to the Mexican border, and he kind of got in with a certain kind of, I don't know if it was a bad crowd or not, but he definitely, I think, from that on, nobody ever saw him again. So it's like kind of he just went off there, wandered off kind of there in a kind of like a Cormac McCarthy kind of Blood Meridian kind of thing. But he was in the Mexican-American War, so yeah, and the Civil War, so he's like kind of a dual veteran of those wars, and yeah, a lot of his stuff like an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which I also recently read in a collection of short stories, which none other was prompted by this. That has to do with like executions and military stuff, and but again, all this stuff is a kind of a I don't have a super deep, profound knowledge of yet, but it's interesting because all these different kind of tunnels that you kind of burrow deep into, and like, you can plant seeds, and like you can see how far you can go down weird fiction down that tunnel, and there's plenty of different contenders. But I want to read this quote by it, but it's basically from the first passage that's on the back here in my version. I thought it was going to be like a kind of a blurb about the book, but it turned out that there's I don't know if there's much of an introduction in this, so there's kind of right into it. Yeah. But anyway, so during my convalescence, I had bought and read for the first time The King in Yellow. I remember after finishing the first act that it occurred to me that I had better stop. I started up and flung the book back into the fireplace. The volume struck up in the barred grate and fell open into the hearth in the firelight. If I had not caught a glimpse of the opening words in the second act, I should never have finished it, but as I stood up to pick it back up, my eyes became riveted to the open page, and with a cry of terror, or perhaps it was of joy so poignant that I suffered in every nerve. I snatched the thing out of the coals and crept shaking to my bedroom, where I read it and reread it, and wept and laughed, and trembled with a horror at which at times assailed me yet. This is the thing that troubles me, for I cannot forget Carcosa, where the black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men throughout lengthen in the afternoon, where the twin suns sink into the level of Hali, and my mind will bear forever the memory of the pallid mask. So again, that's another motif, is the pallid mask, and like, take off your mask, and imagery of that kind of masquerade. But yes, it's also been, it is kind of just your classic kind of scary story, but it does actually take on a more poetic, romantic, and if upbeat tenor as the book goes on. Like, you're not stuck in, it's like, I like to think of it as that one Sigur Rós album that starts out, it's like, I think it's literally just like parentheses, I think, untitled, I think, but yeah, it starts out like very kind of brooding and like very melancholy, and then it gets like more and more upbeat and kind of bubbly, I guess, or more triumphant as the album progresses. But yeah, this is definitely a testament to kind of just a very interesting, unique blend of styles too, because a part of it has been referred to as decadent literature. I think I mentioned on this before that I've the stuff of Octave Mirbeau, who I believe I actually heard of by via Franz Kafka, or people reviewing Franz Kafka, various sources, in articles talking about how Octave Mirbeau's The Torture Garden, or something, de Le Jardin in French, that was actually a kind of impetus for Kafka to start in the penal colony, and that was so. Again, kind of this imagery of decadence isn't necessarily as bad as you think, but definitely Oscar Wilde, another one, Picture of Dorian Gray. That's a definite very decadent kind of staple. Things that are kind of heightened and flamboyant in a way. They're exaggerated. Things are brought up. Like if you look at the art around the time, I think French symbolism, like Marcel Schwob, I think stuff like that really kind of. That kind of movement kind of blended in, Arthur Rimbaud, or Rambo, I think it's pronounced, stuff like that. Baudelaire, yes, Charles Baudelaire, yeah. All these people, poets, and all these were kind of in cahoots, or, contemporaries of one another. André Gide, I think I mentioned this, that he actually kind of knew all these people. And he was starting out kind of in the symbolism, and then he kind of progressed a little bit more, and, his style changed, I guess, but... The Immortalist, I think, by Gide is definitely a very symbolism kind of novel. There's a lot of underlying kind of, so The King in Yellow, it basically starts off with that's only a few pages in, that quote, so that was, the first one was called The Repair of Reputations. So basically, a king in yellow kind of motif kind of appears and drops back out again throughout the whole novel, I believe. Little quotes and stuff. You'll get, like, in the Court of the Dragon, you'll have the first quote is, "Oh, thou who burns in the heart for those who burn in hell, whose fires thyself shall free them in turn. How long be crying, mercy on them, God? Why, who art thou to teach me how to learn?" So you get, like, dream visions, or, kind of very portentous kind of augurings. And another one says, a lot of it's in French too. Oh yes, there's some French. Because this novel actually takes place in both New York and France. So it starts off right in probably my favorite, and I think this is a common theme that I've seen in different people's take on this book, is that the very first, The Repair of Reputations, is actually like the most golden kind of perfectly executed and crafted story on here. It's like it engages you and draws you in, but it's also just kind of eerie and creepy enough to be like, but not eerie and creepy enough in a way that's like trying to sicken you on purpose. But like basically, yes. So it's basically follows right off the bat in 20 years in the future. So it's like kind of a little bit of a speculative fiction if you think about it, because it's like this was 1895 and this is actually 30 years in the future. I think it was 1920 or 1920. So the first little snippet that toward the end of the year 1920, the government of the United States had practically completed the program, adopted the last months of President Winthrop's administration. So obviously it's a fictional character, but I guess it's it's somebody who could have been like maybe Woodrow Wilson, I guess, in place. The country was apparently tranquil. Everybody knew the tariff and labor questions was settled. The war with Germany, an incident on the country's seizure of the Samoan Islands, had left no visible scars in the Republic. And temporary in the occupation of Norfolk, invading Arby. So it goes on, and he's like talks about suicide. That suicide is actually banned. That our narrator kind of who remains kind of nameless throughout this, I believe, that he's. Oh, I'm sorry, Wilde. I think his name is. So again, another decadent thing, Oscar Wilde. So he's going around and he's seeing all this, kind of them repealing it, and then taking, I believe he called it the legal chambers of New York City, where Robert Chambers was born and raised. I think, and died in New York City. But I believe he also went to France too. I think he was educated there. I'm just going back and forth between the bio and whatnot. I try not to read too many quotes from this, because I think like reading, I don't want to take people's time up like reading long sections of it, because I feel like that kind of takes away the allure, the kind of experience of somebody. It is a good way of sampling and giving good homage to the book, but I think like also that I don't want to kind of stand here and just like read the whole book for you guys. So, but yeah, so he's basically Wilde is he's kind of caught in the midst of this, and so suicide is being repealed as a it's now legal. Everybody can do it. So, which is I didn't put this together until I kind of thought about it a little bit more, but till maybe a few days ago, because I did this kind of, I only finished this a few weeks ago, so it is still kind of fresh in my head. But the reason that suicide was taken, made legal, was because the King in Yellow, this this insane book has been creeping into people's brains, kind of like a viral kind of phenomena, where everybody's reading this book and going stark mad. And being committed to asylums. Some people kill themselves, and it's very, that's like a very kind of a trope that I very much love. I think it shows up kind of in Infinite Jest, whether it's the movie that the narrator or Hal Incandenza watches. I think one of the main characters, he's like stuck in a thing where he's like all these other enthusiasts, and it's so good that nobody else wants to do anything else but watch that movie. It could also be a analogy for addiction. It could be like something that's so good, something that like some piece of art that cuts right through the the carapace, like right through every layer down to the very nitty gritty of the human psyche, that it's so good that it's too much to see. Like the human mind is not built for this. We have not evolved creatures of Darwinian social evolution or whatever. We haven't actually been able to like assimilate this or accept this. Like we're not ready for it, I guess, is the main theme of this. And that's I found really fascinating because he goes from then and it like kind of goes, and I thought I was caught off guard by this kind of transition, if I could call it that. But it was the way in which Wilde walks from this kind of seeing all these kind of people, like a parade of people kind of, you know, repealing this thing and, you know, walking past the legal chambers where now suicide and all this stuff is happening. A lot of history is taking place and or tentatively taking place. And he walks, you know, but then he kind of walks there and then goes to his friend or his cousin's apartment. And they were, what was it, Constantina? So he, yeah. So he goes after he's going to his doctor's, you know, to get his something looked at. I think to get a kind of a physical kind of checkup. He goes back onto Wooster Street, and you can tell he has a kind of a pretty intimate knowledge of New York. And he goes to his cousin's house, Constance and Burke, and yeah, so Constance is his cousin's wife. So they're doing this thing where they're kind of working on this interesting kind of they're fashioning some kind of, I think, stone, like some kind of stone work. I don't know if it's called lapidary work, but they are, yeah. It's a interesting thing because then he goes from there to see this old man, or maybe it was the old man's name was Wilde. Okay, yes, the old man's name is Mr. Wilde. Sorry, so which is actually more fitting. But the old man is like, you know, he has a kind of a cat that's like kind of very wayward and kind of like finicky and is prone to kind of violent spasms where it just like lashes out, and he's trying to kind of reestablish something because basically this Mr. Wilde character is an eccentric old guy, lives in a flat alone, and he's like, you know, he seems to be kind of aging, kind of, he's, you know, he's very interestingly, he's like very like diminutive, but he has like a kind of interesting kind of almost muscly build or whatever. Like he's like kind of has an interesting kind of odd shape to him, and he's, you know, he's basically kind of, you almost imagine he's kind of a circus type character in a sense, but he's also got like this great knowledge and like this great kind of ability to like repair people's reputations. That's kind of as kind of what it says, but you know, he's able to mend people, and you know, he has like all these different files and stuff, and like it's very great inventory, I guess, of all these people. And that's kind of more or less kind of in the real world. A lot of these different stories, I felt like, you know, they seem to be venturing into dream world, but came back to the real world and were like, okay, we're here in material reality now. This is the, you know, this in New York or in Paris. So yeah, basically, Chambers himself went to Paris and was actually educated there in different arts, and I think that's how he came upon and stumbled upon this scene of the decadence, because he was born, 1866, I believe, so he would have been probably high off of that around the time he published this, and, you know, but yeah, he was greatly influenced by that, not just the French, but, you know, particularly the Parisian kind of flair, and it is hard not to get kind of, if you've been there yourself, it's like hard not to. I mean, from the tomb of Oscar Wilde with all the kisses on it, you know, the lipstick, I think, stuck to the tomb and all the messages, and to the just how long it takes to kind of get intimate or to get acquainted even just remotely with like Paris, because it's such a, not only is it populated, you know, but it's a densely populated with such a rich history, and it's, you know, like all these houses and, you know, beautiful apartment, you know, buildings and stuff, churches, and built across the river Seine, and that's like the sign, or you know, that has been there for, you know, hundreds of years. Like, so you can imagine, you know, just you know, 100 something years ago, 130 years ago, this is very I don't know. So yeah, the stories get less and less kind of horrific, I guess, you know. And that one wasn't really, even the first one, I was like, you know, really, that, you know, like, the narrator has been, his cousin starts warning him about, you know, this King in Yellow thing, and he's like, probably shouldn't have that copy of that book here. And basically it's become something of a like a samizdat. So it's like a kind of illegal kind of book that's circulated around. It's like it's cursed kind of in the worst kind of way, because it's like it causes people to kind of suffer but it's like it's a kind of it's such an interesting kind of trope, because the narrator of this is kind of moseying around, and he's like flirting with reading it, and he's like, maybe I should, but maybe I shouldn't, and then he thinks better. But it is like the old adage of curiosity killed the cat, and I guess the more you say, I think it's like negative suggestion. I think Darren Brown talks about this in his specials and stuff like that. He talks about how the more you say not to do something, the more the more compelled we feel to do this very same thing. So, but yeah. So as then the stories go on, the second story being The Yellow Sign, and that's talking about more so the mark of this kind of the mental kind of scarring, I guess, of the book, and as it goes on, we have Yellow Sign, the Demoiselle Days, and a lot of these take place in Paris, and then there's different things where some of the characters like Trent go to Paris and fall in love. He's an American that falls in love with a Parisian, or with a French lady at least, and like that kind of difficulties of navigating that kind of romance, and some of them, so that's kind of later on. And then, so The Street on the Shell. So this one, Street of the First Shell, was more of almost like a war kind of thing. It's like a war-torn kind of thing going on in, I believe, in Paris. And yeah, there's a lot of, it's like kind of another speculative kind of thing, like what would happen if, like a kind of shelling would instantly begin. But yeah, so yeah, The Street of the First Shell. It's probably the longest one, I think. The Street on the Lady of the Fields. So yeah, I think that's the one that's the romance story. So yeah, there's also another one about a painter who has a dream about almost a Pygmalion kind of. I think he was constructing the image or the model of his painting within his own kind of subconscious, and that kind of arises to be a something like kind of that changes his life, because he's, it's like something that's like totally reflexive that he didn't, ask for, but it's a blessing and a curse in that sense. So anyway, but yeah, that is all I have for Robert Chambers, The King in Yellow, and I definitely recommend it. Especially there's probably no better time to read it than around this time, and yeah, thanks for watching.